This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Ateli Edwards. Tonight's top stories from East Asia. Taiwan hits back after China's President Xi Jinping told his U.S. counterpart that unifying the island with the mainland is central to Beijing's vision, a claim Taipei flatly rejects. Now, U.S. President Donald Trump, however, made no mention of Taiwan after their call, instead saying ties with China are extremely strong, with talks focused on Ukraine, fentanyl and trade. But Mr. Trump did make a phone call to Japan's Prime Minister later. Sanae Takaichi sought to dispel concerns that the American leader did not have her back, saying his message was, "Call me anytime." Meanwhile, the spat deepens, China ordering its airlines to further cut flights to Japan, extending the pullback through March next year. Also in East Asia tonight, a small radio station defying North Korea's information blackout. Meet the defectors beaming uncensored foreign news across the border, but funding cuts could soon silence their mission. Plus, Taiwan and China's rivalry plays out in Central America as Honduras heads to the polls this weekend to elect its next president. Taiwan has reacted angrily after Chinese President Xi Jinping told U.S. President Donald Trump the island joining the mainland was a key part of Beijing's vision. In a phone call, Mr. Xi pressed the American leader on China's sovereignty claims stemming from the end of World War II. Well, China has offered Taiwan a one-country, two-systems model akin to Hong Kong, but that enjoys no support from any mainstream Taiwanese political party. The premier says a return to China is not an option for the island's 23 million people.
中华民国台湾是一个完完全全的主权独立的国家，2300万的国人没有回归的这个选项，这个很清楚的。那么台湾是世界的台湾，台湾在区域安全以及科技经济发展上面对世界是至为重要的，所以维持现状也是世界 现在大家共同注意的一个发展，中国没有办法用任何的形式来破坏这个现状，这也是为什么我们要加强自己的自我防卫能力，跟世界民主理念国家站在一起的重要的原因。
Well, the phone call between the leaders of the U.S. and China comes as relations between Beijing and Tokyo rupture. Well, that's after the Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi told Parliament that if China were to attack Taiwan, Tokyo could respond militarily. Beijing says President Xi told Mr. Trump that Taiwan's return to China is central to its vision for the global order and that the U.S. understands how important the Taiwan question is to China. But Mr. Trump made no mention of the island, saying their talk covered Ukraine, fentanyl and trade. Well, the two leaders last met in South Korea last month, where they agreed on a framework for a trade deal that has yet to be finalized. After their latest phone call, Mr. Trump says relations with China are extremely strong. He has accepted an invitation to visit Beijing in April and also invited Mr. Xi for a state visit to Washington later in the year. Just hours after his phone call with Mr. Xi, President Trump spoke by phone to Japan's leader. Sanae Takaichi says that Mr. Trump told her about his conversation with Mr. Xi, but she sought to dispel any concerns that the U.S. president did not have her back.
トランプ大統領からは、私とは極めて親しい友人であり、いつでも電話をしてきてほしいというお話がございました。で、会談内容でございますけれども、これ外交上のやり取りでございますので、詳細については差し控えさせてください。
Mr. Trump has not commented publicly on the escalating dispute between Japan and China. Beijing has cautioned its citizens against traveling to Japan and sent a letter to UN Chief Antonio Guterres last week, accusing Ms. Takaichi of threatening an armed intervention over Taiwan. But Tokyo slams Beijing's claims as unacceptable.
事実に反する中国側の主張は受け入れられず、日本政府としてはしっかりと反論、そして発信していく必要があると考えます。
And for more, we are joined now by CNA senior correspondents Tan Yuguan in Shanghai as well as Victoria Jen in Taipei. First to you, Yuguan. Tell us more about how China framed this conversation and what message is it trying to send by highlighting Taiwan's return to China at this point?
Well, among the things that China has said, it stressed that Taiwan's return to China is central to the post-war order. This statement really underscores how for Beijing, Taiwan is not a standalone issue, but a litmus test of whether Washington truly respects what China calls its core interests. It's worth noting and emphasizing that as far as Beijing is concerned, Taiwan, being a part of China, is the reddest of red lines that no one should cross. And this stance isn't just an official stance, but also the prevailing feeling among many ordinary people I speak to here in China, effectively making it a position that's quite unmovable. And it explains the extent of the reaction we see from China to Takaichi's remarks on Taiwan. It's worth noting that while President Trump made no mention of Taiwan in his post about the phone call with President Xi, that wasn't the case for reports out of China. In China's account of the call published by Xinhua News Agency, it said that President Trump stated that the United States understands the importance of the Taiwan issue to China. Now, the call did take many people by surprise. Neither Washington nor Beijing signaled it ahead in advance. There was also now disputed accounts on who initiated the call. While the Wall Street Journal reported that it was President Xi who initiated the call, the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokeswoman said today that she learned that the call was initiated by the U.S. She added that since President Trump's second term began, the two heads of states have maintained regular exchanges. As for the Taiwan question, the spokeswoman stressed that it is China's internal affair and does not tolerate any interference by any external forces, which of course is the boilerplate reaction from Beijing to anything regarding Taiwan. Otelli?
Yuguan, also worth mentioning, this is the first call between Presidents Trump and Xi since their last meeting in South Korea. How is that relationship being viewed in Beijing and also the significance of both leaders agreeing to reciprocal visits?
Well, as far as the significance is concerned, it goes without saying that the relationship between these two elephants in the room will greatly matter to everyone else in the world. Watchers note that while the two nations are not about to become great pals, the call and the prospect of future meetings does mean that the relationship may signal, in the words of one opinion piece in SCMP, a new normal. For Beijing, this new normal means stabilizing the China-US relationship. Now, President Xi himself framed his meeting in Busan with President Trump as having provided more momentum for it to sail forward steadily. He also noted that the description that China-US cooperation benefits both sides, while confrontation hurts both sides, reflect a common sense proven by experience. And in the vision of China and the United States helping each other succeed and prosper together is a, quote, tangible prospect within reach, unquote. He said that while the two sides should lengthen the list of cooperation and shorten the list of problems. Of course, watchers note it's not a certainty that upcoming meetings would definitely happen, and the long list of issues between the two strategic rivals would be ironed out for sure. But judging by how things worked previously, it would give the prospect of the meeting will give impetus for officials from both sides to work towards making enough progress on their common disputes so that the two leaders can meet once again. It's almost a given that if the two sides don't make any progress at all on the lower levels, the meeting between the two leaders are unlikely to happen. In some ways, the visits are highly visible signpostings that the two sides desire to prevent rivalry from spiraling into open hostility. Otelli?
Thanks for that, Yuguan. I want to bring you in now, Victoria. I mean, Taiwan is watching all of this very closely. And how are they interpreting the phone calls between Presidents Donald Trump, President Xi, and also with Trump and Japan's PM Takaichi?
Yes, you're right. Taiwan is watching the Trump-Xi phone call very closely because whenever the two leaders discuss Taiwan directly, it has real political implications here. Xi's comment that Taiwan returned to China after World War II was seen in Taipei as a deliberate attempt to push Beijing's historical narrative at a time when China has been increasing military and political pressure on the island. Now, for Taiwan, the concern is that Xi is trying to frame Taiwan's status in conversations with major powers without Taiwan having any voice in the discussion. That's why officials here are doubling down on today's reality, and that is Taiwan has its own government, military, and democratic system, and its future must be decided by its people, not by wartime history. This comes at a time when Taiwan is also paying close attention to the Trump-Takaichi phone call. Taipei sees the broader political alignment between Washington and Tokyo as meaningful. Taiwan believes stronger coordinations between the U.S. and Japan contributes to a more stable security environment in the region.
And Vic, President Xi, he also talked about wartime history in that call with President Trump. Well, Taiwan is looking at this. What's their position on it?
Well, Xi's reference to World War II is part of how Beijing explains its claim over Taiwan. But Taiwan says that telling only part of the story leaves out key facts. Beijing cites wartime declarations like the Cairo Declaration, which said Japan should give up territories it occupied, including Taiwan. Now, after Japan's defeat in 1945, Taiwan was placed under the administration of the Republic of China, the government that was then based on the mainland. But Taiwan argues that this does not support Beijing's position today because the People's Republic of China, the government in Beijing now, did not exist until 1949. So by that time, the Chinese Civil War has restarted and the ROC government retreated to Taiwan, where it has governed ever since. From Taipei's perspective, that means wartime declarations cannot be used to justify Beijing's political claims today. Now, Taiwan also notes that the San Francisco Peace Treaty in 1951 had Japan renounce Taiwan but did not specify a recipient, leaving the question unresolved. So for Taipei, the key point is the present. Taiwan has developed its own democratic system and identity over the past 8 decades. And its future, the government says, must be decided by its people. That's why Taiwan consistently pushed back when Beijing uses wartime history, because Taipei sees it as an attempt to reshape the narrative in China's favor. Oteli?
Many thanks for those reports. CNA's senior correspondents Victoria Jian in Taipei and Tan Yuguan in Shanghai. Right, we're going to go for a short break now, but coming up next on East Asia Tonight, CEO of China's travel giant Trip.com talks about the outlook of travel demand in the country and how it's being shaped by geopolitics. Plus, Swiss business school IMD turns out its latest set of indicators on future readiness. We'll tell you which of the companies are most prepared. Hello again. Glad you are with us on East Asia Tonight. Well, we've got Roland Lim here with the very latest in the business world. And we all know that China basically tightening the screws on Japan again, and this time in the skies. What's happening there?
Right, you are, Oteli. Yes, flight cuts means a hit for airlines, tourism, and the Japanese yen. This as China puts more pressure on Japan's tourism trade. Now, China-Japan travel could face a prolonged slump as tensions between the two economies continue. Beijing has reportedly told Chinese airlines to cut flights to Japan through to March next year. Bloomberg reports that carriers have leeway over which flights to cancel, but the timing coincides with the global airline switch from winter to summer schedules at the end of March. Travel from China to Japan has already dipped after Beijing warned its citizens against visiting. Data from travel platform Yumi Trip shows cancelled tickets between 15th and 23rd November surged to 12 times the previous week's total. Flight Master data indicates 12 China-Japan routes have been affected, with the cancellation rate projected to hit more than 21% by late December. Flights from Tianjin and Nanjing to Osaka are among the hardest hit. Japan's NHK says local businesses are bracing for slower sales, while Beijing's latest directive means the downturn will stretch through the Chinese New Year period. That's a key travel and spending time. China Eastern Airlines is the most exposed to the mainland airlines from a pullback in demand. It operates almost 16,000 flights to Japan annually. Its stocks closed nearly 4% down today, along with two other major carriers, China Southern and Air China, sliding around 3% each. Earlier, I spoke to Jane Sun, CEO of Trip.com, to talk about the outlook of travel demand in China and the impact from the ongoing tensions with Japan.
When we look at our consumers, they pay attention to a couple of elements. The first one is the safety of the destination, how welcoming they feel, how friendly people are towards them. The second one is the visa application, how easy it is for them to apply visas. And the third one is direct flight. So at any given time, they take into consideration of a comprehensive overview of the destination to make the reservation. And if consumer has the money, has the time, they will travel. If one destination is better than another ones, they can easily make their choice. So we see the impact overall is manageable.
Manageable. So still quite significant, though. I mean, are you seeing this as a temporary shock or a structural reset of sorts?
I think we have seen historically many movements, but overall, as long as customers have money, have time, they will travel from one destination to another.
Okay. It was a great super golden week just past month. Before the flare-up, Japan was the top outbound destination for Chinese travelers. Where has the lost demand now gone?
Yeah, there are many good destinations people enjoying. For example, Singapore is very popular. Malaysia is very popular. Thailand is recovering well. Korea is doing quite well as well. And also in the long tail, Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa during wintertime is very popular.
And what is your data also telling you from the Golden Week about their spending habits, apart from destination?
Yeah, so we have seen three trends, which we call the 3 E's, long stay, long distance, and long tail. So people are very interested in going long distance. For example, Middle East, Abu Dhabi, Dubai, Saudi Arabia become very popular. And they will stay longer because they're traveling so far away from home. And long tail are lots of new destinations emerging to be very interesting to the travelers. So these are the trends we saw during the holiday season.
Trip.com, of course, has been pushing AI tools like Trip Genie as well as personalization when it comes to travel. Have you seen this make a difference to your bookings and to your margins?
Yes, absolutely. We invest heavily in technology and AI. We differentiate ourselves in a couple of areas. The first one is we offer one-stop total solution. So when a customer makes a reservation from Singapore to London, for example, if he or she is booking a business class or first class, we immediately will push Four Seasons or Peninsula Hotels or Rosewood to you. And once the customer decides which hotel to stay, we'll calculate the distance between Heathrow Airport to the hotel. We'll recommend a chauffeur for you. When you check in, we'll tell you, oh, the spa product is ready. There is a new Michelin restaurant opened, and tomorrow you can enjoy a Broadway show. So traveling with us will take care of everything for you. The second one is excellent services. So on your road, if something goes wrong when you call our call center, within 30 seconds, a live person will answer the call using your native language, hopefully, and they will solve the issues for you on the spot.
Name me one big swing factor for the Asia-Pacific travel map in 2026, and how will you actually position yourself in that scenario?
Asia Pacific, the rising middle class is huge. And we believe the GDP growth rate in Asia will lead the whole world's development. With a strong growth in GDP growth and a huge population behind us, we'll be able to bring people who are willing to spend money with high quality to the rest of the world. I was looking at the total spending in 2024. China is the highest. They spent $250 billion in 2024. USA is the second, 150 to 160 billion. And the other countries, such as South Korea, spend about 30 billion. So these customers will bring lots of buying powers and create job opportunities for each destinations they're traveling to.
SoftBank shares slid almost 10%, hitting a 2.5-month low, with fears Google's new Gemini artificial intelligence might rival OpenAI's ChatGPT. SoftBank is OpenAI's largest investor, holding more than $50 billion worth of stock. Google launched its Gemini 3 AI model last week, pitching it as a rival to OpenAI's ChatGPT. The Gemini 3 model has received positive reviews, with Salesforce CEO Mark Benioff even declaring that Gemini 3 has leapt past ChatGPT. Last month, SoftBank announced that it divested its entire stake in NVIDIA in a pivot towards OpenAI. NVIDIA also sliding in after-hours trade after a report that the Meta plans to use Google's AI chips in its data centers. Google parent Alphabet rising more than 2.5% on the back of both the Gemini performance and the Meta report. Google's Tensor processing units are chips designed for artificial intelligence tasks and is gaining popularity as an alternative to NVIDIA's graphics processing units. Meta is one of the largest spenders on data centers and AI, and if the deal goes through, will be a win for Google as it seeks to rival NVIDIA. The global business playbook is shifting. Tech disruptions, geopolitics, and risk of US-China decoupling are reshuffling winners and losers across the industries. In its latest Future Readiness Indicator report, Swiss business school IMD says the companies are most likely to hold up are those that control every layer of the AI ecosystem, not just those that spend the most. IMD ranks NVIDIA, Microsoft, and Alphabet among the most future-proof companies as their edge is across the AI supply chain. And that covers everything from chips to cloud infrastructure to the user interface. IMD's report also highlights a major shift in pharmaceuticals. Now, Johnson & Johnson, Roche, and AstraZeneca top the chart given their broad diversification, heavy R&D, as well as early AI adoption. In fashion, the report shows a polarized picture. At one end, ultra-luxury names such as LVMH and Hermes continues to be the top-ranking fashion brands. On the other, fashion powerhouse Inditex, parent of Zara and Bershka, continues to gain share. Howard Yu, Professor of Management and Innovation from IMD Business School, explained what it means for companies to be future-ready.
In 2025 and going into 2026, we saw companies that are future-ready are the one who systematically de-risk market risk. Like you said, geopolitics is so noisy. And so whether it is in the fashion industry, as you see from LVMH to Hermes to Zara, or whether it's big tech giant from NVIDIA to Microsoft, they are the one who have been able to embrace systematic, purposeful expansion, whether it's geographical area or product line. And as a result, what we see in the AI company, for instance, the tech giant, they are the one who really control the entire tech stack. They're not just providing one product, but they are providing user interface, software integration, in a sense that to lock in the whole ecosystem. And this is how the risk is a must. And this is how company can continue to grow the next growth engine going forward.
And that's all for business. Otelli.
Thanks so much for that, Roland. Right, we're going to go for another break now, but coming up on East Asia Tonight, Taiwan at the center of an escalating row between China and Japan as the island rejects Beijing's vision of reunification. And in Latin America, ties with Taipei emerge as major issues in the Honduran presidential race. We'll speak to our special guests when we return. This is East Asia Tonight, and here are the headlines we're following. Taiwan hits back after China's President Xi Jinping told his U.S. counterpart that unifying the island with the mainland is central to Beijing's vision, a claim Taipei flatly rejects. Well, U.S. President Donald Trump, however, made no mention of Taiwan after their call, instead saying that ties with China are extremely strong, with talks focused on Ukraine, fentanyl, and trade. But Mr. Trump did make a phone call to Japan's Prime Minister later. Sanae Takaichi sought to dispel concerns that the American leader did not have her back, saying his message was, "Call me anytime." And for more insights on how those calls affect Taiwan, let's first bring in Stephen Nagy, Professor of Politics and International Studies at International Christian University. Well, thanks, Prof, for joining us this evening. First up, help us understand this. After back-to-back calls with China and Japan, is there any chance at all that President Trump is playing middleman here amid rising tensions over Taiwan?
Well, I think it's a real mix between being the Pied Piper, playing his flute and making his allies and adversary dance, and quite frankly, being a middleman. I think it's in his interest for the friction between Japan and China to settle, for China to be able to come to a trade agreement with the United States, and he desperately wants that trade agreement, but he also wants China to help end the war in Ukraine that's being prosecuted by China. So he has a lot on his plate, and he may be using Japan and China against each other to try and, again, pull China into some kind of agreement where they do much more for the U.S. And to, again, push that end to the war. So it's complicated, and Trump's track record is more a Pied Piper than a middleman, and this is something that we should continue to watch.
Right. And I mean, is that theory also based on the fact that President Trump, while he spoke warmly about these extremely strong ties with China, but he omitted talking about Taiwan? And how do you read into that?
So this is, the readout on the Chinese side is they put Taiwan at the center of discussions and trying to create a global narrative that's, based in Washington, that Taiwan is somehow part of the post-World War II settlement. And I think that this does not really go with how historians understand where Taiwan fits in the broader puzzle of global post-World War II history. Second, I think it's really important for us to be thinking about where China is today, the state of its economy, and really the state of I think, Xi Jinping's popularity domestically back home. It's been 13 years of bad economic growth. China is seen not in the most positive light compared to other countries. And frankly, I think its behavior, its massive disinformation campaign against Japan has been seen for what it is, a disinformation campaign and economic coercion. For ordinary Chinese, it's tough. And I think Xi Jinping is using the Taiwan card, speaking directly to President Trump to demonstrate that he's fighting for China's core interests in a way to kind of consolidate his legitimacy and regain his authority back home after really, again, 13 really hard years on ordinary Chinese people.
Now, let's pick up on Japan here. I mean, Prime Minister Takaichi, she's positioned Japan as a strong supporter of Taiwan security, even as Beijing, we see them pushing back hard. So how do you see her growing rapport, or at least that's what it appears to be, with President Trump affect Japan's balancing act between China and the U.S.?
So, what she said very clearly is that if there was some kind of forced reunification with Taiwan, it would affect Japan's interests and they'd have to defend themselves. That's what she said. This is not brain surgery. Actually, I think many countries in the region completely agree with this. what she wants to do is, and she called to Trump to, say that our alliance is stronger than ever, that we have shared interests in the region. And what happens to Taiwan matters not just to Japan and to the broader region. And again, Japan is someone that countries trust. Even Prime Minister of Singapore, Lawrence Wong, mentioned that in his speech, that it's the most trusted country in the region. It's not a militarist country. And Takaichi wants to make sure that the United States and other countries also are really in line with Prime Minister Wong's remarks about Japan and the Japanese people in the post-World War II period.
And then we've got Ambassador George Glass. He did reaffirm U.S. support for Japan, he said, in the face of Chinese coercion. How credible is that assurance, though? When Washington's top leadership, they seem focused on trade rather than security.
It's the walk, it's not the talk. And I think whatever the ambassador says, it needs to be backed up by concrete defense cooperation and other forms of cooperation. With that, despite the unorthodox policies of the Trump administration since he came back into power in 2025 January, what we've seen is actually the U.S.-Japan alliance, I think, strengthen, and particularly since his visit to Japan last month, Japan and the United States signed a rare earth deal. There was an early delivery of missile systems. They talked about more cooperation. There's been joint drills between the United States, South Korea, and Japan. This is all the walk, not just the talk. And in that sense, I think Ambassador Glass's comments are correct. The United States does have Japan's back. They're firmly engaged in the region. And as I mentioned in my initial comments, this calling back and forth to President Xi and Prime Minister Takaichi, this is a Pied Piper's approach to pushing the Chinese harder and trying to get the Japanese to do more for their own defense, but also to hopefully contribute to, again, as Mr. Trump and his supporters say, make America great again.
Right. Thanks so very much, Professor Nagy, for speaking with us. It's the walk and not the talk that counts. I like that line there. Thank you so much for that, Professor of Politics and International Studies at International Christian University. Meantime, China's President Xi Jinping has vowed a closer cooperation with Tonga. Well, he made the remarks during a visit by the king of the island nation to Beijing. A Chinese state news agency, Xinhua, says that Mr. Xi has pledged continued support for Tonga's economic and social development as he meets King Tupou in the Chinese capital. Well, the king is on a week-long state visit to China, making his first trip to the country in 7 years. And this trip comes as both China and Tonga mark 27 years of diplomatic relations. The Tonga king has toured various cities in Fujian province over the past few days, focusing on bilateral cooperation in agriculture, education, trade, public health, and cultural exchange. Now, Taiwan has emerged as a key issue in Honduras' upcoming election, with several potential presidential candidates promising to strengthen ties with the island. Now, the move could offer Taipei its first new diplomatic partner in nearly 2 decades. Hondurans will head to the polls this Sunday, with recent polls showing a tight 3-way race among the leading candidates you see there. They include former Defense Minister Rixi Moncada from the ruling leftist Libre Party. We've got former Tegucigalpa Mayor Nasri Asfura of the Conservative National Party and television host Salvador Nasrallah, representing the centrist Liberal Party. And while the candidates have laid out plans to tackle Honduras' domestic challenges, their campaigns have also centered on their foreign policy stance on China and Taiwan. Both Asfura and Nasrallah say that they could restore diplomatic ties with Taipei, a move that could deal Beijing its biggest diplomatic setback in Latin America in decades. Well, the Chinese embassy in Honduras has urged the politicians to act prudently on the Taiwan issue, warning against, quote, infringing upon China's sovereignty in any way. Honduras had maintained 8 decades of relations with Taiwan before President Xiomara Castro cut ties in 2023. She had switched allegiance to Beijing in hopes of boosting economic cooperation as her country struggles with heavy debt, including about $600 million owed to Taiwan. For more insights on this, we are joined by Dr. Randall Shepard. He is Assistant Professor in Latin American Studies at Leiden University. Well, thanks, Dr. Shepard, for joining us this evening. Firstly, help the viewers understand why the question of choosing between Taiwan and China has become such a hot-button issue on this campaign trail.
Thank you. Yes, Honduras is the most recent country in the region to switch its alliance from Taipei to Beijing. So this is something that's happened under the current government of Xiomara Castro, who, as you mentioned, is from the left-wing Libre Party. But it's the most recent of a region-wide trend that we've seen, beginning with Costa Rica in 2007. And so this policy is very much identified with her government, but also very much identified with taking Honduras, which has traditionally been a strong ally of the United States and also had more conservative governments. Certainly the previous three governments of the National Party were more conservative, and a strong ally of the United States in this way. So the debate over the recognition of Taipei and Beijing is tied into the sort of identification of Honduras, whether it's drifting to the left and more friendly to countries such as Venezuela and Cuba, or whether it is going to stay more closely tied to its traditional ally of the United States, and what that means geopolitically, but also what it means economically, because the US government has also become a lot more interested in Latin America under this current Trump administration, and particularly interested in the growing role of China in the region. So for potential candidates in Honduras, signaling the willingness to switch back from Beijing to Taipei is a way of signaling their friendliness to the US administration, which is particularly important in the context of what, as you also mentioned, is likely to be a tight electoral race, and also one in which the validity of the eventual results is almost certainly going to be contested.
Now, I want to pick up on that economic push factor on voters. We've seen reports that, for example, Honduran shrimp exporters and other sectors basically lost key markets after their diplomatic break with Taiwan. I mean, these economic realities, how does that shape voter sentiment when they hit the polls?
It is significant. I think the decision to switch from Taipei to Beijing for the Xiomara Castro government had more to do with access to investment from China than there was obviously hope for greater export markets, but that was part of the demand made by Castro was for greater aid from Taiwan, which Taiwan wasn't, and renegotiation of debts owed to Taiwan, which the Taiwanese government was not willing to do. And China, the idea is China has been slow in promising this aid and delivering this aid for development, for infrastructure. And one of the more tangible outcomes of this shift in relation has been the impact on the shrimp exports, which is an important export industry for Honduras. So China is quite aware of this, and in recent months, the Chinese state-owned firms have signed new agreements to import more shrimp from Honduras. But I will say, I think it is more part of this general sort of political narrative. In general, the shrimp industry is repositioned to try and find new export markets in Europe. And the way in which it's being framed within the election is more a sense of whether this deal was a bad deal for Honduras in the sense of undermining its sovereignty and flooding Honduras with cheap Chinese goods. So that's where I think there is obviously job losses in the shrimp industry, but I think it's really tied into this notion of foreign policy, sovereignty, and the contestation of perhaps a leftward drift of Honduras under Xiomara Castro.
And let's just say, if Honduras were to flip back to Taiwan, what kind of ripple effect could that have, across Central America, and especially for countries they're still balancing between Beijing's investments and Taipei's partnerships?
Well, it's hard to know. I mean, the only holdout really in continuing to recognize Taipei as Guatemala. So as I mentioned, we've seen all the other countries, beginning with Costa Rica and then Panama, El Salvador, and Nicaragua, as well as Dominican Republic, have all flipped. So I guess it strengthens Guatemala's relationship with Taipei. There aren't many signs that other countries are going to shift, although we have seen this very strong pressure on Panama particularly. And we saw the issue of the ownership of the ports on the Pacific and Atlantic coast in Panama, and the Panamanian government of Molino very quickly moving to try and shift them from Chinese ownership or from a Hong Kong firm to a US firm. So it certainly would expand this pressure on governments in the region to distance themselves somewhat from Beijing, but I don't think we're going to see any other countries rush to shift back their recognition to Taipei over Beijing.
And just looking ahead, I mean, this Honduras, Taiwan, China triangle, what does it tell us about the future of small state diplomacy?
Well, one thing to keep in mind is that in this region, the United States has historically been very, very dominant. And you can't really talk about history and politics in Central America without talking about the role of the United States. And this administration is the most Latin America focused and certainly the most Central America focused administration since perhaps the Reagan administration in the 1980s and then during the Cold War period. So what it shows is countries have a very difficult balancing act here because the United States wants signals that a country such as Honduras is in a friendly camp and supporting US foreign policy goals. The United States has also ramped up this talk associated with the Monroe Doctrine of the 19th century about the Western Hemisphere being the US's exclusive sphere of influence. So it speaks to the difficulty in trying to balance the geopolitical demands of a more assertive United States with the economic demands, because China has been very generous for most countries in the region in terms of providing credit and providing investment for development. So it just shows this sort of way in which...
But just very quickly, before we go, I just want to know who you think is going to be the next president of Honduras.
That is a question that no one can really say because the polls are very, very tight. So the polls are tight. And as I mentioned before, all candidates are questioning the legitimacy of the elections. So there's no clear front runner. Salvador Nasrallah is slightly ahead in the polls, but it's very difficult to really tell.
All right. Well, thank you so very much for your time and thoughts, Dr. Randall Shepard, Assistant Professor in Latin American Studies at Leiden University. Well, on that note, we are going to go for a short break now, but coming up, defectors fight to keep North Koreans connected to the world, even as global broadcasts go silent. Plus, an emotional farewell in France. 2 beloved pandas head home to China. The heartbreaking reason for the move. Next. South Korea has issued its highest red alert nationwide to enhance quarantine measures after confirming its 6th case of African swine fever this year. Well, the latest instance was discovered at a farm in the country's largest pig breeding region. And this is the first time the virus has been reported in South Chungcheong province, located south of Seoul. More than 1,400 pigs have been culled from the affected farms. Disinfectant measures and emergency inspections are being conducted in estates around the area. Authorities are closely monitoring for potential infections at about 140 farms nearby. Nationwide, a 48-hour standstill order is in place for pig farms and related facilities. The Agriculture Ministry has pledged to mobilize all available resources to prevent any additional cases and to fully contain the spread of African swine fever in the country. Now, a small team of North Korean defectors based in Seoul are working round the clock to broadcast real-time news into the country. But with major broadcasters shutting down, the mission to reach millions hangs in the balance.
Every day, a small radio station in South Korea's capital reaches across one of the world's most heavily fortified borders, transmitting uncensored news into North Korea. For listeners there, tuning in could mean prison. But after major international broadcasters fell silent this year, one group of defectors is fighting to keep that fragile lifeline alive.
그래서 저희 탈북민 입장에서는 이런 라디오 방송을 중단한 거에 대해서 되게 미국 정부라든가 대한민국 정부에 대한 불만이 늘어나죠. 이렇게 2,300만의 북한 주민을 버리는 거냐 이런 생각이 들죠.
Seoul-based station Free North Korea Radio, or FNK, has tried for 2 decades to broadcast news to the North's 26 million people. But since 2 major US-funded broadcasters, Voice of America and Radio Free Asia, halted their Korean-language radio programs, this has become more of a challenge. The tip in content comes after President Donald Trump argued that the networks had a liberal bias or were, quote, anti-Trump. He signed an executive order to dismantle the parent company. South Korea's President Lee Jae-myung, meanwhile, stopped cross-border radio broadcasts, making it a focus of his government to try and cool tensions with Pyongyang. All radio and TV sets are fixed to state-run channels in the reclusive nation. But according to 38 North, a website focusing on analysis in and around North Korea, foreign broadcasts reaching the country were down 85% following those cuts by US and South Korean governments. But despite these difficulties, a number of defectors are still determined to get outside news in. South Korean-based defector turned lawyer Lee Young-hyun started a website this month aiming to provide North Koreans with other ways to access outside content. Mr. Lee says the goal of Korea Internet Studio is to reach those living outside of the North who have access to mobile phones and the Internet, a privilege ordinary citizens do not have.
라고 생각합니다. 저희 방송을 통해서 북한이 붕괴되고 북한 주민들이 봉기가 일어나고 그런 것까지 저희가 기대하거나 그러지는 않습니다. 다만 북한 주민들의 생각이 우리 방송을 통해서 외부에 이런 세상이 있구나. 그리고 이런 어떤 자유와 권리들을 향유할 수 있는 이런 좋은 세상들이 있구나. 이런 것들만 깨우쳐도 그것만으로도 저희의 어떤 방송의 목적은 어느 정도 달성한 게 아닌가 그 생각을 하고 있습니다.
He is hopeful that North Korea will eventually ease its strict restrictions on the internet in a limited manner, but many remain skeptical. Since 2020, Pyongyang has enacted strict laws to toughen its fight against foreign cultural influences, particularly South Korea's. It reportedly imposes up to 10 years imprisonment with hard labour on anyone who consumes, possesses or spreads foreign movies or music.
Finally, 2 pandas in central France are set to return to China after spending about 13 years in the country. Well, hundreds of fans visited Beauval Zoo to bid a final au revoir to Huan Huan and her partner Yuanzi. 17-year-old Huan Huan is suffering from kidney failure, a disease that's common in bears around her age. The pandas will live out their retirement at the Chengdu Panda Sanctuary in Sichuan province. The pair arrived in 2012 as part of China's so-called panda diplomacy, which saw bears sent to zoos across the globe as soft power ambassadors. Now, the star attractions produced 3 cubs while in the zoo, among them the first baby panda born in France. In less than an hour from now, they will be escorted to Charles de Gaulle Airport in Paris for their flight, under police protection, of course. And that's all we've got for you on East Asia Tonight. Hope you've enjoyed the bulletin. Don't forget your headlines anytime at cna.asia. And you can always look us up on Facebook and YouTube. Thanks for watching.